think it depends on the central bank. If you are the Russian central bank or the Chinese central bank or the Iranian central bank, and you are concerned about the extraterritorial nature of U.S. law, in other words, if you don't like your actions and the way you trade constrained, and if you're concerned about the U.S. control of the SWIFT system, the international banking system, then you have a real reason to hold gold as opposed to U.S. dollars as your reserve asset. In other countries that found themselves way long U.S. treasuries, I'm thinking about Korea and China in particular, when you got paid a real rate of interest, 10 years ago, 7 years ago, you had a huge incentive to hold dollars because they were so liquid and they paid a yield. Gold, of course, paying very little yield unless you lease it. But the circumstance begins to change when you are holding U.S. government securities and A, not getting paid for it, and B, watching them get quantitatively eased to the point where you need to begin to be concerned about the purchasing power. Traditionally, gold has been viewed in many parts of the world as a vote of non-confidence in central banks. And central bankers are living, breathing human beings, just like you and me. Votes of non-confidence in finance guys like me or bloggers like you are something that might not sit well with either of us. And so traditionally, central bankers have viewed gold almost as a hostile instrument, despite the fact that they have to own it. And when there were real yields in other asset classes and there were excuses not to hold assets that were in effect a warrant against their performance, they were predisposed not to own gold. The British central bank and the Canadian central banks both famously sold most of their gold holdings well below $1,000 an ounce. Turns out probably not a really good move. Do central banks trade in gold? Absolutely. Would I expect the U.S. central bank or the European Union central banks to use some of the proceeds of quantitative easing to support the gold market? No. My belief is that they view gold as a symptom of economic nervousness, and they view an increase in gold price as feeding economic nervousness. And I think that they see their role as promoting economic stability, which an increase in the gold price does not do. I think you will see other banks buy gold, not to support gold, but rather because of a nervousness about the other asset classes which might be available to them.
Right. Okay, great. So you mentioned some of the, I guess, developing countries, Russia, China. Do you see, quantitative easing, inflation, all this stuff, and you said they're going to try and back up their currency more with gold. Could this lead to kind of a de-dollarization in some areas of the world?
I think that would take place over a very long period of time. The U.S. Treasury market, there is still an amazing amount of faith in the United States abroad, and an amazing amount of faith about the United States domestically. I would tell you that simple arithmetic begins to question that faith. But I think a reckoning is a long way off. The truth is that we have the most liquid and transparent financial system in the world. And the U.S., despite its woes, looks fairly good compared to other markets. My friend Doug Casey describes the U.S. dollar as the prettiest mare at the slaughterhouse. That's probably a bit extreme. But I remember talking to one very big Asian client about their institution's treasury holdings. And I said, from my point of view as American, I look at this as a tremendous advantage. You guys send us all kinds of cool stuff. Cars, refrigerators, computers, steel. We send you back a bunch of paper with a dream printed on it. To me, that's a hell of a trade. Particularly when I think about the interest rate that you get by way of compensation. It just sort of feels dishonest. And I remember he sort of smiled and looked at me. And he says, yes, in fact, it's probably a certificated lie. But it's the deepest and most liquid lie that we're told. And so then I asked him, and this is a very big investor, or he represents a very big institution. I said, "Do you trust us?" And he said, "Oh, no, but we trust you much more than we trust each other." And I think part of the strength of the US economy and the US dollar as the world's reserve currency and the US 10-year Treasury as the world's benchmark security has to do with the lack of viable alternatives. The transparency of the US financial system, which is extraordinary, and the liquidity that's available in US dollars and US Treasuries. For myself, I haven't decided to be gold backed, but I certainly own more gold than most people. And one would argue, other than fear, because I'm the largest shareholder in Sprott Inc., which is in effect a brand name for gold investing. If gold does well, I'll do well anyway. But that notwithstanding, owning gold feels to me like catastrophe insurance. It helps me sleep nights and stay calm. And at my age, sleeping nights is a good thing.